right, thanks everyone. So I'm Cayla Cavey. I'm a statewide groundwater education specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point Center for Watershed Science and Education, which is a joint partnership between the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point as well as UW Extension. I'll actually be talking later in the presentation, so I'll turn it over to my colleague Abby for now.
Hello everyone, I'm Abby Johnson. I'm a data and GIS specialist at UWSP, Center for Watershed Science and Education. So the Center for Watershed Science and Education works across the state of Wisconsin supporting watershed stewardship by assisting citizens with lake, river, and drinking water quality problems. The center is closely affiliated with our Water and Environmental Analysis Lab, which we call WHEEL for short, which was established in 1972 and has over 50 years of water quality data. It is a state-certified water testing lab. It conducts water quality monitoring for not only private wells, but also rivers, lakes, and streams. The center has a 40-year history of robust outreach programming, like community well testing programs, where water quality data is displayed on GIS maps, along with land use and geology of the region. It is also very important to the center and WHEEL to share and teach students at UWSP. They have the opportunity to work in the lab, learning how to use the instruments, analyze a wide range of water quality parameters, as well as in the center, learning data entry and analysis. So now that you know a little bit more about the center and WHEEL, today we would like to talk to you about the Wisconsin Well Water Quality Viewer. We'll tell you what the viewer is, give you a little history, show you the functionality, how it's used for educational purposes, the data collection behind it, how it's used for public outreach, and some of the challenges and limitations. So the Wisconsin Well Water Quality Viewer is an interactive educational tool to help people better understand Wisconsin's groundwater resources that many of us rely on for our drinking water. Communities or individuals can use the viewer to see what is known about well water quality throughout the state, compare water quality in different areas, raise awareness of local groundwater quality issues, promote testing and outreach efforts, and encourage well testing in areas where little data exists. So it is publicly available. It's an interactive mapping application using spatially aggregated private well water quality data, and it provides a spatial picture of groundwater quality in Wisconsin for 14 water quality parameters.
We're having some issues.
I don't think so. I was just doing the arrow button.
Well, someone will have to buy us a beer later for this, but yeah, does anybody have any technical troubleshooting?
They're working on it back here.
Awesome.
Those guys are.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I moved it forward.
That's okay.
Spoiler.
So the history of the viewer was created in 2012 by my predecessor, Dave Mechanic, using ArcGIS's web app builder. The data behind the viewer has been updated multiple times throughout the years, with the most recent being in January of this year with data through 2025. Also in 2025, we had to update the platform behind the viewer. ArcGIS is no longer providing support to web app builder. So we hired a consultant that moved the platform to Angular. The website is provided here and the QR code. So overall, the viewer was developed to utilize a large amount of data in a way that is accessible to the public and resource managers. So next I will talk about the data sources. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. So of course the main source of data behind the viewer is from UWSP, but we have some smaller Local labs throughout the state, counties, if they have their own labs, have provided us some of their data. Eau Claire, La Crosse, Lincoln, and Lafayette counties. Okay. The next largest data source is from the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. They provide atrazine and or nitrate data they have collected with almost 10,000 samples. In the past, the DNR has provided their NR 812 data, which requires all new, replaced, or rehabilitated private wells be tested for bacteria and nitrate. And then I also download from the Wisconsin DNR's Groundwater Retriever Network with, so they have over 90,000 samples with nitrate and or arsenic data. And then as I mentioned, UWSP has provided 146,198 samples. So now that you know what the viewer is and the history, Cayla will tell you about the functionality.
All right, so one of the purposes that Abby mentioned for, yeah, this is just wonky, isn't it? There we go. All right, so one of the key motivators behind putting the viewer together is we have all this data. It's being collected a lot of the times by multiple agencies, and it's a lot of good visual for this is a bunch of piles of sand, right, on a beach, but that sand isn't really put into a sand castle or something, so this viewer is our sand castle. It visualizes abstract topics, right, and kind of puts a face to a name when we're trying to talk to the public about these water quality contaminants like nitrate that you can't see, smell, or taste. What does it mean? Where is it? Having that map really ties that and makes it full circle. So with the viewer, with those purposes in mind, we can view and compare general groundwater quality at different spatial scales, which I'll get into in the next couple of slides. And with that, we can also actually generate statistics reports for all of the 14 different parameters you can view in the viewer. And then through a lot of that, we can use the viewer in our outreach efforts to prioritize where testing is done to get more data and to address areas where groundwater quality has been impacted. And all of those things together support raising awareness of local groundwater quality issues by, again, kind of putting a face to the name with the groundwater topics that we're trying to talk to the public about. So if we were to actually kind of do a mock use of the viewer, one of the first things that you would see when you open it is this scalable data view. So we can view at the county scale, but we can also actually get down even to the section level, so town and range and even section. In 2025, when we changed the platform as well, we did update the viewer to be more accessible. So we have a few different options for the colors that you can use to view data, which is really helpful, as well as just making the overall navigation of the viewer more functional. And as Abby mentioned, in early 2026, she updated the viewer with all of our data through 2025. So now I think, if you were to add them all together, we have a little over 300,000 samples in the viewer. And those, again, are spatially aggregated to provide privacy for people who are submitting samples, which kind of brings me to, at the section level in town and range, you can see there are some areas on the map that are blank. And those areas indicate essentially that we just don't have enough data there to reliably aggregate it to create an accurate spatial picture of groundwater quality there. So section level, I think our requirements pretty low for this section, but we just have some areas where there's not a lot of people, not a lot of wells, or a lot of barriers to private well testing, which we'll also talk about a little bit later on. So if we were to move on then, if you were in the viewer using it and you wanted to generate a statistics report, you can do that by geography, shape, or location. So for geography, we have a ton of different options. I wish you could show them all today, but I'll use an example of a Huck 10 watershed, but there's many other groundwater units and things that you can view summaries by, but you can also generate custom shapes like a polygon of a specific area you wanted to test, or even a specific location. You can search an address in the map, but it won't show you a data point for an address for privacy reasons. But if you were looking to see oh, I live here, I wonder what water quality's like around my house, you could search where your home is and see the overall in the town that you're in, or maybe even the section if there's enough data, but you can't for a singular point, just to protect privacy. Moving back to this though, if I were to select, okay, I want to go by geography and look at Huck 10 watersheds in Wisconsin. In this example here, we're looking at the Rush River, which is a Huck 10 watershed in western Wisconsin. The boundary blue I know is a little bit hard to see, so I have it outlined in black. That's something with this color scheme in particular isn't the best, which is another reason why we updated the colors in 2025. But then if I were to select Get Statistics, this is for nitrate. Nitrate's the most common groundwater contaminant in Wisconsin, so that's the one we've got shown here. This statistics report will show all of the data we have within that user-defined Huck 10 watershed area. So we've got number of samples, right, min, max, and we can see how many even exceed the 10 parts per million health standard, which in this case is about 10%. All right, that's not so great. Okay, so what if you wanted to get statistics for more than just one spot? So say there were a few different areas that you wanted to combine together to see what the groundwater quality is like. You can actually add multiple places to one report. So in this example here, I added a few different places in Wapaka County in Wisconsin, just to see what that overall summary is. So you can add, I don't even know if we have a lid on how many areas you can add. There's probably a cap at some point, but you can add those areas, select your parameter, and then add to report, generate statistics, and then you can also download that report for use. Okay. So getting to the use side of things, how do we actually use the viewer in our outreach efforts? And one of the ways we do that I'll talk about in a few slides is through our community well testing programs, which are really similar to Virginia's, so it's kind of cool to hear that work from them. But we apply the viewer in kind of three major groups. So the first one would be to identify. So through the viewer, as you saw on the few prior slides, we can identify where there are data gaps. And that's really helpful, say, for a county if they have some funding for well water testing and they want to improve in a certain town where there's a lot of people maybe on private wells but not a lot of data. They can prioritize their test efforts there, but we can also prioritize testing efforts based on areas of known degraded water quality, like where Stevens Point is in Wisconsin. We're located in the Central Sands, and we have a lot of agriculture as well. So as you can imagine, we have a fair amount of nitrate contamination there below the sands. We have our sandstone aquifer with all that agriculture, rapid water movement. That's an area where we know there's some degraded water quality from nitrate, which has led to a lot of prioritizing sample efforts in those areas, as well as remediation. So another thing that we can do is communicate better, right? We're putting a visual to the data that we're collecting and communicating to the public so we can raise awareness of those groundwater quality issues and really hone in on that community-focused approach to sampling and management to communicate those important topics. And on the education standpoint, we want the viewer to be an accessible tool. It is free and open to all. We try to make it as user-friendly as we can. And it also helps us increase transparency with the public and local government. People know what's going on. We've got this data shown to everyone. And again, we're visualizing an abstract topic that is, again, it's not something you can typically see, right? Groundwater, it's under IFREET, and a lot of these things are dissolved in it. So it's, again, putting a face to a name. So one of the ways we apply the viewer and also support the viewer is through our community well testing programs. We actually call these Wisconsin Water Wellness, which is just a pun I love so much. And we use these programs to, again, get data for the viewer as well as do outreach. So through these programs, a lot like Virginia, actually, we collaborate with local agents. Sometimes that's counties and town governments, but other time it is local extension staff, or even a lot of lake associations in Wisconsin like to do testing programs of the private wells around their lakes, which is really cool. So we'll work with those different agents we'll start with identifying a timeline, what their testing goals are, and establish the test areas they want to focus on. We have some counties that have the bandwidth to do a countywide testing project that's over 300 samples, but we have some where they do quadrants of their townships each year. So they'll do the northeastern quadrant and then rotate every year for different townships, so we can work with them to see what makes sense for their resources. Then we'll aid in promoting a program. So we'll put out flyers, help them with developing materials that are accurate, and communicate to people about the importance of well testing and what it means. And then since we have the Wheel Lab, as Avi mentioned, in-house, we'll coordinate with the lab to organize what we call a lab date. And much like what Virginia does is we'll have kits of samples mailed out, usually to like a central location where our agent will help hand out and distribute those kits to people who want to participate. They will collect the sample on their own on all the same day. We have really detailed sampling instructions on where to sample for which concerns and for which parameters. So say from the pressure tank from some versus the kitchen tap for others if we're looking at things like lead, copper, zinc, right? So then those people will collect their samples and bring them back to that central location where we will have the agent then drive them to the lab, usually the next morning, given the bacteria hold time, analyze the samples, and then what we're really proud of is our follow-up educational sessions. So on the back end, when we have all of this data, Abby will generate maps that show for that individual test area the water quality results. So we'll aggregate this data as well, but say for nitrate, we can view areas on sort of a sliding scale for nitrate to see what that looks like, and I will come and give a presentation on what is groundwater, what are these contaminants that we're testing for, why are they important, what are the health considerations, and then how do you treat for those different contaminants. So through that, as I mentioned, we can scale these to available community resources. We have some programs where a county has a lot of funds they can dedicate, and they'll do a 5-year trend monitoring program where they monitor the same wells for 5 years for nitrate, chloride, as well as some other important water quality parameters with known well construction. And then we'll do a thorough report and data analysis for that. But on the other hand, we have a town government that's like, hey, we've got a lot of people asking us questions about water quality, what can we do? And then we can just help them facilitate the logistics to reduce those barriers that people have with well testing. Even if the person is paying for the test themselves, having that avenue to test through is proven to be very, very helpful for many people. And a lot of the ways we facilitate these programs too is how we group the tests that we're doing. So we have a suite of different water test packages that are geared towards specific aesthetic and health concerns that people have in Wisconsin. So it provides more economical options because we discount the tests pretty heavily. And it also provides a more consistent approach for those communities because they can say, okay, well, we want to do this package. And they can always pick that package versus like, well, we're just going to test for nitrate, but maybe next time we want to test for hardness. It really provides an opportunity to get a lot of data at once. No? Yes, okay. Oh, it all makes sense now. It's not the monitor. Okay. All right, so through these well testing programs, right, as I mentioned, we're reducing barriers to private well water testing. Some of those barriers might be cost, but they also might be just knowing what to test for, where to test, when to test, and how to even get your sample to a lab, as I'm sure we're all familiar with handling those situations by providing an opportunity for someone to have essentially all of those things communicated to them where all they have to do is show up, pick up a test, take the sample, and drive it back. In some cases, we even have townies who will help people transport back and forth, especially our elderly communities who may not be as mobile. So it really reduces a lot of barriers and then increases the educational output for people at the individual scale and the communities by the products that we make after a well testing program. So that would be the map summaries that we have as well as the follow-up educational presentation and materials we provide. And then we have, which is like kind of the best thing, is a lot of water quality data generated and stored by a single entity. So it's analyzed consistently, right? Stored in the same database. So with all of that, there we go. All of that data we can both utilize and support our well water quality viewer. And we've shown since 2012 that this has worked very well to increase the amount of data each year that we get in that viewer. Okay, now we're rolling. All right, so we're gonna get into some limitations and challenges of this. So I'll turn it over to Abby and then do a couple more, and it looks like we'll have some time for questions after that.
So as I mentioned before, we are using multiple data sources, and it's pretty time consuming combining all this data collection and when it's stored by different agencies, which is often in different formats, differing detection limits. So it can be quite cumbersome. And as I said, time limiting. And then also a big challenge we overcame last year was updating the platform behind the viewer. So on the outreach side, we did it again.
We do have a lot of challenges when it comes to how people want to use the viewer. One of those is wanting to use it as a replacement for a well test. As we all know, well construction plays a major role in an individual's water quality as well as localized flow and things like that. So the viewer is not a replacement for an individual well test, which we have on our website, and I think even as a disclaimer on the viewer, but it's something that people still want to use it for. And another thing is that the viewer doesn't show groundwater quality trends over time. Since not all of the samples collected that are in the viewer were collected as part of an organized study, if we were to include time as a component on the map, it could allow people to draw conclusions that may not be so reliable and would just be to fit the narrative they were trying to show. So another thing is that, as you saw, there are some areas where we just don't have a lot of data, so there are some gaps. And then it doesn't show differences in water quality construction or water quality based on well construction. It'd be great to add that. Wisconsin has a really wonderful database of well construction reports, but for us to integrate that and do a lot of the matching for individual well construction reports, especially older ones, would be like a full-time job. It'd be amazing, but it's not something we have the capacity for currently. So I'll leave it. I did it again. I keep doing it. We'll leave it at that. We fit this all together, right, with the community well testing. We're generating that private well water quality data, supporting the viewer, and all of those things feed into that educational benefit to individuals and resource managers alike as they go throughout their lives, concerned about their water quality or doing their jobs as resource managers. So thank you all. I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. Yeah. Read it if you want, and if you want to take it. Okay. So first question is, did you have the ability or authority to access well data from testing done at external certified labs? I would say kind of yes and no to ability, but no to authority. We have had some external labs reach out wanting to incorporate their data, but as Abby kind of mentioned with the challenges, our ability to do that is limited based on resources. So we've kind of come to having to do like a per sample fee if a lab wanted to integrate their data, just due to the massive amount of staff time it would take to make that data into a format that we could actually upload to the viewer. So we have the ability, but there are some caveats to how well and how quickly we can do that without additional support. What is the source of funding for the well testing program? Are tests free for participants? So that's a really great question too. So the source of funding varies a lot. Sometimes, and I would say most of the times, it's from a county appropriating funds in their annual budget for testing. We have a lot of really robust land and water conservation departments in Wisconsin counties that lead a lot of these efforts. So sometimes counties will fund the entire cost of the test. Sometimes they'll subsidize the cost to make it cheaper, and sometimes they won't at all if they have limited resources, but what they will do is provide staff time and that hands-on time to do the logistics of getting the kids to and from and promoting the program. So it really varies based on the partner that we're working with. What statistical methods are used to estimate water quality statistics for different spatial units? So we typically just do the summary statistics, and in terms of the spatial aggregation, it varies by spatial unit. Abby could probably speak to that with a little bit more detail, though.
For the county aggregated data, we require at least 20 samples. For the town range, at least 5 samples, and then per section, at least 2.
This is Abby kind of touched on this just now, but what is the smallest spatial scale at which data are available? In other words, what is the scale of section? Again, what statistical methods are used to create the summary statistics for this spatial scale? So section, I think, is like 1 square mile, and then I'm assuming we're using like an R package for the summary statistics, but I don't know exactly.
The summary statistics are just generated using, we have different ranges for each analyte that we show on the summary statistics, and then like overall for nitrate we show an exceedance percentage. But it's really just a spatial average aggregation. It's pretty simple.
We've got like min, max, median, mean, those types of things. It's nothing too complicated, yeah. Yes. Sorry, for the map is section the smallest unit for data-related reasons, or due to information privacy requirements. Honestly, I don't know the exact answer to that since this was probably decided long before either of our times, but I'm assuming it's privacy, but maybe not.
We collect data for quarter section, but if you were to show that on a map, I think people could figure out like whose house it was, and it wouldn't, yeah, there would be privacy issues, so.
Yes, it is anonymized. So when we say spatially aggregated, we're averaging that data per a a square mile section. So you would not be able to associate that general average for that area with any singular data point. So there is no personally identifiable information or even a singular point on the map that you could view that would be associated with water quality, say from like one sample. And in terms of like handling data privacy generally, our data stays in our database. We don't ever give out personally identifiable information. It's not something that we do. And then what if someone does not want to share the results? If they reached out indicating that they didn't want their results included, we would omit them based on their preference if someone didn't want it. Do you intend to track user behavior, for example, number of address searches, whether users are searching most often by shape or geography, etc., to better understand information that users are after, or is that most valuable to them? Also to inform future sampling or programming. I wish we could. I know we track the number of visits for this site, but I don't know if we have the capacity to track those specific searches. We don't think we can. But that would be really amazing because I think if we could, we would, because that would really be informative. All right. Thank you. If we're done. Yeah.